Mike McCool. I'm in the Royal Examiner studio, and with me this morning, or this afternoon it is, Steven Reinagel, right? Steven is now a local author here in Front Royal. You moved here, which is great. We love people that move in Front Royal. So tell us a little bit about Steven, where you're from, and what you were mentioned as we walking into the studio. They said you're always behind the camera, and now you're going to be in front of the camera. Well, that happens sometimes. So give us a little background before we talk about your book.
Sure, yeah. I have lived actually my entire life in Rochester, New York.
I've been there one time. I went up to Xerox and a couple other places along that area. It's one of those places you can't get there. It's a roundabout way to get.
It's not easy, but I found my way down from here.
Yeah, well, we're glad you're here.
Yep. And actually, I did work at Xerox for 23 years.
Oh, wow, okay.
And spent about half of that time doing media work, AV work.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Well, what got you into this novel business here?
Well, I've always loved writing. I've always written since childhood. And typically, I would start stories and never finish them, which is...
Yeah, well, this is like what most of us do.
Yep. But this idea... I really loved it. I thought it was great, and as I was writing it, it just kept snowballing into a nice big project. And I said, "Well, I can't stop on this one. I want to see this through to completion." And I'm very pleased with the results.
So your book's been out a while, a year or so, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And as we were sitting down, I said, "This is something about magical and fantasy." And you said you don't write things about that. And I said, "Well, here it is, right here. Let me zoom in on the cover." Mark's going to zoom in on the cover here, and we'll get a picture of the cover. It takes a second. You got it there, Mark? There he goes. All right. So, but you said here it is. So give us that. If you don't write about this, how did you manage to? When did this story hit you?
Sure. Well, I mostly wrote science fiction growing up.
Okay.
But I had an idea. I was writing a young adult novel that was kind of in the turn of the century, a steampunk era.
Right, right.
But the children in that were facing off against some witches, and a witch would summon familiars. And as I was writing that story, the idea of the familiar as a character kind of intrigued me. And I said, well, what if I told a story from the familiar's point of view?
That's interesting.
And then I spun that off into this whole other novel. The other novel, the young adult one, isn't even published yet. Hopefully it will be, but this is the one that really sparked.
Well, that's what happens sometimes. Yeah. It just falls in place and just seems to work. Mm-hmm. How's the reaction to your book?
Oh, very good. People have been very intrigued by a character, by the story that's told from the point of view of a very unique character, a character who doesn't always exist. He doesn't always live, so it made it for me a very fun challenge as a writer. How do I tell a narrative from the point of view of a character who's not always there, who doesn't always exist?
Well, I like to see the movie. That sounds like it'd be an interesting movie. So we'll plug that. Pay attention if you want to write. If you want to do a movie on a really interesting book, this sounds like the one. You want to give me a little synopsis about the book here? So you're gonna be at the Royal Oak Bookshop. When?
Right, October 26th. It's okay. Saturday at 1 p.m.
All right, so because we want to entice people to come down to see you, buy this book. Obviously, you'll autograph it for them. And again, I call it fantasy, magical fantasy, but that seems to be pretty popular right now.
Seems to be. This is, of course, with Harry Potter.
Sure.
It is really, grabbed a lot of people's imagination. I won't say this is writing on the coattails,
right?
Because this is a very different take on it. This does not take place on Earth. This is in an entirely alternate reality, alternate universe.
And you live on the edge.
Well, one thing that writers love to do is to create world building. Right. And anytime you're going to take your story and you're going to put it on a different world, you get to play in a giant sandbox.
I was going to say, you have there's no restrictions.
Exactly.
Nothing's holding you back, and whatever your mind can conceive, you can do it.
Yep. And then you can play around with all the rules of that world.
There are no rules. You create the rules.
Exactly.
That's pretty cool to do it that way. Yeah. But if you watch the Disney Channel, I always said. Walt Disney would turn over in his grave if he's seen how the Disney Channel. I mean, it's witches, it's magic, it's everything.
It's really
that is just completely. That's the popular. They go where the money is, I guess. And
they do.
It seems to
Yes, but that's what makes it partly challenging is to come up with something different and unique within that genre.
Right.
It's a real challenge, and that's why I thought this is pretty unique. And a lot of people that read it said, yeah, they had never heard of a story told from this point of view
No,
before.
it doesn't sound familiar. Sorry, that came out that way, familiar. But what's the character? Just give me a little hint there. So when I want to buy this book, why should I buy it?
Certainly. Well, a familiar, if for those who aren't
we're not magical.
if we're not familiar with
we
it.
We want Little House on the Prairie.
Sure,
That's
yeah. Well, they are summoned, they're creatures summoned by witches to do whatever purpose that witch has. And the familiar can take on a variety of forms. They can be birds, they can be cats, they can be snakes.
Or they could be creatures like yours.
Or they can be something that looks like a 7-foot tall demon. Now, imagine what kind of tasks he is summoned to do. A creature like that is not summoned to do.
They typically, the people that summon them have full control over them.
Exactly.
Is your character that way?
Right. They're subject to all those laws of magic. They have to obey their summoner.
And I was wondering why that is, because I just watched this TV series called The Outpost, and one of their black bloods summons this demon, but the demon has to do everything they say. So it sounds, I guess they have rules and...
Exactly. And they have to do what they're told before the time runs out and they vanish back into oblivion.
Exactly, yeah.
Now, what makes this character interesting is he decides that he no longer wants to do these murderous deeds that he is summoned to do. Yeah, he begins to grow a conscience, and he begins to, and he finds another reason that for wanting to sustain his life. So his mission in this book is to see how can I break the laws of magic, do the impossible,
and exist.
Yes.
It sounds interesting. That sounds great.
Thank you.
Do you have another book? Well, we know you have another book you haven't published, but is that one going to be your next one, you think? Or you think another part 2 of this character is going to keep going?
Oh, it will. When you get to the end of this, you realize, well, there's something big that did not get resolved. It actually did not get resolved. It needs to get resolved, and so people are always asking me, when is the next book coming out? So I'm hot on the trail of writing that.
Well, that's what happens whenever you're watching a TV or reading a show or reading a book. You can tell there's going to be part 2 or number 2, 3, and 4. And that's what makes the thing live.
Absolutely. I've got no set plans because as an author, I believe it should be an organic process. You should really let the story develop on its own. And so I don't know. Right now I've got plans for just one more. It clearly builds much more of the world.
Yeah.
And that could be it, or it could become a third book. I really don't know yet.
Well, how long did it take you to write this one?
Oh, this took 3 years, which may sound like a lot.
It was probably this thick when you got finished, right?
Oh my goodness. No, actually, I was pleased with this. I wanted to keep this a little lean because I know a lot of fantasy books. They're big. They're trying. You think of the Lord of the Rings.
Sure.
You think of Game of Thrones. They're big, and I know people today, they don't have a lot of time that they can just divest in this. So I wanted to write a nice fantasy story, put people in another world, but not something that they would have to commit tons of time to read.
Weeks and weeks and weeks to read it.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like you did it. Did your family get into this, or is this...
They help family and friends. They were really
that's always,
encouraging.
they're perfect editors. They just tell you exactly how to do it.
Yeah, I had to find some critiquers who would not just tell me what I wanted to hear, but say, no, you need to look at this again. You need to do this, or can you explore this a little more?
An editor is what makes a book.
Mm-hmm.
Getting somebody that can look at it, like you said, in a way through another, through different colored glasses that you can't see.
Point out things that you may not have thought about. As a matter of fact, when I was in Rochester, New York, I was part of a writers group, and I found that they were invaluable.
Very good critiquing each other.
We would all critique and point things out, and all of our work would be stronger.
Yeah, well, sometimes I'm wondering, that's too good. He's better than mine, so I'm going to tell you something. We don't want to do that.
You would think, but
no,
they
really,
are the most supportive bunch of people.
They are.
Yep, and my plan is to start also a writers group down here in Front Royal.
Well, there's a lot of local authors. I mean, of course, they've been through our studio in the last year or two, and Tammy over at the Royal Oak Bookshop, she really promotes local authors and encourage them to come by the bookshop, because that's a very unique place as well. and it has a following. So it's really amazing. But it's great. I'm always glad to see someone that has that dream and can put it in print. It's great, great.
Thank you.
Anything else you want to talk about?
No, that's it. This book is, like I said, I'm doing the signing. I'm going to have copies there
Right.
to sell, and be glad to talk to people about it and about the writing process. And of
You're
course,
not going to bring this character with you then.
I'll keep him in the wings.
He'll disappear during that time.
That's right.
All
Or
right.
reappear at key moments.
It's great. Well, Stephen will be at the Royal Oak Bookshop on October the 26th at 1 o'clock. Be there for a couple hours. Bring his books and not his demons, but it'll be great. It's a very interesting book, and we hope people will stop by the shop and meet you. And we hope to hear from you again when you get this second book out.
Very good. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen.